Without further ado, we'll get started. The first speaker here is, as you all know, Kenneth Cole. It is my privilege to introduce a man who is passionate about social change. He's the founder of Kenneth Cole Productions. He strongly believes that business and community service are interdependent. Throughout his career, Kenneth has been a relentless advocate for many important social issues and has the courage to confront controversial issues and to say things that others wouldn't. Kenneth Cole has been able to unite his fashion instincts and business acumen with his philanthropic convictions, and he's the perfect person to be talking to you all today. As chairman to the Foundation for AIDS Research and a founding board member to the homeless organization Help USA, Kenneth Cole has made it his business to fuse fashion with social action. Kenneth is also a board member of the Council of Fashion Designers of America and the Sundance Institute. Like Compass Partners, Kenneth has a deep history in developing community engagement programs throughout his work at his alma mater, Emory, and his latest venture with Columbia University. As Kenneth likes to say, it's great to be known for your shoes, but it's even better to be recognized for your soul. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kenneth Cole.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Arthur. So this is an interesting experience for me, and I was intrigued and inspired as soon as I met both of these young gentlemen, and by their resourcefulness and their enthusiasm and their genuine commitment to want to make this place we live better than it was. And last night I had the privilege, I was invited to a reception, and I learned that there is a distinction between social entrepreneurs and very social entrepreneurs. I also actually learned that there was significance behind the term compass, because I was intrigued. Is it in fact one's moral compass that guides one to want to do the right thing? Or is that somebody just gave you directions how to get where you need to go and you chose them? But they have, I think, made some very good choices so far in their short tenure, and I'm really excited to feel like I have a little closer seat now to watch where their journey takes them. And they've made some very good choices despite their selection of a speaker this morning to address you. First, one quick disclaimer is that you should know I don't do this. I have a day job, and I sell stuff. That's what I do, and I sell and I design stuff. But I welcome the opportunity to impose my various thoughts on unsuspecting young people in the hope that maybe I can add a little bit to their journey. So I was at one point an aspiring baseball player, member of the New York Mets. I wanted to be shortstop. I didn't get there. And I was going to be a lawyer, but somehow I wound up becoming a designer, a businessman, and a frustrated activist, and a brand. I love what I do. It's totally consuming, and what I do personally and professionally are totally intertwined, and they coexist mutually at every path and every day, and it's 24/7, and it's forever changing with the world today changing at the pace that it is, and I'm going to speak about that briefly. So in turn, is how we deal with it and how we respond to it. Fashion, for example, was not that long ago a defining characteristic of a few confident and courageous individuals who could afford it. Today, it's essentially a ubiquitous commodity that's available to everyone at every price, everywhere. It's been democratized thanks to our media, global media. And in fact, one might argue it is a universal language, and maybe the only real universal language. I deliberate at great length as to the usefulness of this and what I do every day, because it takes and consumes so much of me. I deliberate as to the clothing choices that people make, the life choices that people make. And what's important is the distinction between what one does and who one is, which I think is often a very important point to point out, which I'm going to discuss again in a little bit. One of my favorite adages is that before you judge somebody, you should walk a mile in their shoes. And then if you don't like them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. So the world and business, as we all know, are changing essentially at unfathomable speeds. And we all understand that change is something that we need to embrace. It's not consistent with what we learn in school, most business people learn in school. In fact, it's counterintuitive. In school, you're taught, you make an investment, you amortize that investment over as long a period of time as you can, and that's the best investment. But today, one realizes that you need to be prepared to continue to reinvest and to invest in a platform that has the ability to continue to adopt and to change. And that platform, those businesses and those individuals that have the ability to embrace change as opposed to be staggered or stymied by it are the ones that invariably prevail. You know, I was speaking to somebody recently who asked me where I thought the world would be, our industry would be specifically in 5 years. And I said, you can't ask that question anymore, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago for sure, maybe even 2 years ago, how many people do you know that knew what blogging, Skyping, tweeting, poking, texting, and might I say sexting were even 2 years ago? Today, they're part of everybody's vocabulary. The fact that tweeting is a verb and 140 characters are the extent of a thought worth expressing. 10 years ago, this country had its greatest surplus in modern times. 2 years ago, we were on the verge of the greatest depression that we'd ever had. Today, we've supposedly recovered, but unemployment and underemployment are at as higher rates as they've ever been. And even more important, the unemployable is maybe higher because of all the change. Throughout history, we have prevailed in difficult times. Let me try this without this. Can you hear me? Yeah. Throughout history, we have always invariably prevailed, sometimes more easily and more effortlessly than others. And we've done it through reinvention, and that reinvention has usually been guided by entrepreneurs, both corporate and social. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey, about my business, because I think I have reasonable credentials to speak about this specific part of what today's conference is about, and the spirit of reinvention. And it was 1982, and I was thinking I needed and wanted to start a new business. And I didn't have a lot of time, because then, like today, most businesses, I learned, do not, I think 60, 70% of businesses in those days did not survive the first year in business. People invariably underestimate the amount of money they need and the amount of time they need to realize a return on that money. So I knew I needed to move quickly, and so I named the company. I used the name that my parents had made up not that many years prior, knowing that you had a better chance of getting your own name registered than a made-up name. And I needed to get, I needed a name because I needed to register for trade shows, I needed to do packaging and stationery, and I needed to start communicating in a corporate manner. So I used my own name. I named the company Kenneth Cole. It made my mother very happy. And then, but you should also know it was during a downturn in the economy. There was a recession going on in those days in this country. So then I ran to Italy, knowing I had a better chance, and knowing I had a better chance of getting credit from an Italian shoe factory that needed business than from an American bank that didn't. And I designed a line of cool lady shoes. And I came back and I needed to sell them, and you had two choices in those days. You could, if you were in our industry, you could take a showroom at the Hilton Hotel, which is what most did, and there were about 1,100 companies then, 30 floors, 30 some odd companies per floor, and the buyers would come and they'd walk room to room and they'd make their seasonal choices. It was not inexpensive, and but not a wonderful form of self-expression for a new entity. But the alternative was even less available, and that was a big fancy showroom within a 2-block radius of the Hilton Hotel on 6th Avenue in the mid-'50s. So I was talking to a friend of mine, and on a whim he said, you know what, I said to him, who was in the trucking business, I said, would you lend me one of your trailers if I could figure out how to park it in front of the Hilton Hotel in 10 days? And he said, sure, jerk. This is New York. You can't park a bicycle for 10 minutes, let alone a truck for 3 days. But if you can figure it out, I'll even help you decorate it. So I said, thank you very much. Called the mayor's office, Mayor Koch at the time. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, how does one get permission to park a 40-foot trailer on the corner of 6th Avenue, 56th Street, December 2nd? The answer is, son, they don't. This is New York. We get permission only under 2 circumstances. A is if you are a utility company servicing our streets, AT&T and Con Ed, or if you are a production company shooting a full-length motion picture, because we were going through an I Love New York campaign in the early 80s. I said, thank you, Mr. Mayor, hung up the phone. It wasn't really the mayor. And I went to a stationery store the following morning, and I changed my letterhead from Kenneth Cole, Inc. to Kenneth Cole Productions, Inc. And I filed for a permit that afternoon with the mayor's office for permission to shoot a full-length motion picture called The Birth of a Shoe Company. I opened for business on December 2nd with a permit with 2 New York policemen, compliments of who became our doorman, compliments of Mayor Koch. We had a director. Sometimes it was filming his camera, sometimes it wasn't. And we sold 40,000 pairs of shoes in 2.5 days. And I tell that story still, I hadn't told it for a while, and the company still, Kenneth Cole Productions, would trade on the New York Stock Exchange, because it speaks to the notion that the best solutions are rarely the most expensive, almost always the most creative. So the business evolved and the business grew, and I shortly confronted a very specific dilemma, because I had this need to want to expand our opportunities, our resources, offer new products, new customers, and then I was confronted with a very specific decision, because I was selling these cool shoes in all the cool stores, and essentially to all the cool people. So now I had to decide if I'm going to make more shoes, that maybe I'd have to sell to some less cool stores, and then maybe my shoes would be perceived as being not as cool. So, or I can find more things to sell to the same people, which is the path I chose. So, so eventually we built a lifestyle representation of a consistent aesthetic and product offering. The business has always grown. I've always believed that in those days that we were in a recession, and I think that in tough times, people, when business is difficult, people look for creative alternatives, because invariably nothing works. Nothing that has been usually works in the ordinary course. So when things are good, people want to do exactly what they're doing and do more of it in more places. When things are not, they need to reinvent and reformulate. So we have always tried to be that creative alternative. But I've deliberated over the years at great length, consistently, as I said earlier, as to the importance and relevance of what I do, because you need to, you need to give all of yourself to be successful at anything that you do, whether it's a corporate initiative or it's a professional one or it's a personal one. And invariably, people are often frustrated because it's hard to get all those things working at the same time. And and I often say to people, you can be successful working half a day. It's not hard. Any 12 hours you choose. But the truth is, so everybody's working hard, they're committing themselves. Somehow it felt like it needed to be relevant and needed to be more important. So I say to myself, what I'm doing, how important is it? How important is fashion? And in one sense, I say it's really important. It's the only time in our lives where we get to absolutely define ourselves on our terms. You wake up in the morning, you decide what you're going to wear. Most of the people you will encounter in that given day are not going to know much more about you than how you choose to present yourself. So it's very powerful. And I often have people say, well, you know, Ken, I'm not really a fashion guy. And I say, that's okay, but just know that's as big a statement as any. And you should just spend a few seconds in the morning and contemplate the message you're sending. And if that's the one you choose, then that's fine. But you shouldn't be oblivious of it. But so it's a very powerful, and it's a clean slate, and it's unedited, and it's totally on your terms. And it's an individual form of expression which can be interpreted socially as well as culturally, and so it's very powerful. On the other hand, I don't think it's so important. It's not so important if you're hungry, and if you're not well, and your family isn't well, and there's other things that are much bigger and more overwhelming. And it's just somehow you need to figure out how to keep it all in perspective. I often remind my associates that we sell products that people don't need. And if every store closed this afternoon at 12 o'clock, every footwear store, there isn't hardly a woman in America that would go barefoot for 14 years. And people have shoes. Men have shirts, and they have ties, and they have jackets. And so they don't need what we sell. We have to make you think you do. We have to make you glad you thought it and make you think it again. But we shouldn't be delusional. And so we need to know that. And it's humbling, but it's important. So then I say to myself, well, how do we make what we're doing important, if it in and of itself, and I love it because I've never done the same thing any 2 days in my entire career. And every day is different, every day is exciting. The world's changing, and we have a business model that's built to respond to it. So I set out, not that long ago, with the goal of, if I could figure out how to talk to people about not just what's on their body, but what's on their mind, and not just what they wear, but how to be aware, then somehow, in some way, everything would be elevated. And it would all, maybe my personal as well as my professional aesthetics and desires might all converge, and it might all just make more sense. So that was the path we went on. Now, in 1985, there was this pervasive social consciousness in the United States. And there were these initiatives that maybe you guys have heard about, and called Live Aid, World Aid, Hands Across America. And they engulfed everybody. They were generational. But for the most part, it was about world hunger. That was the cause. And specifically Ethiopia was how it all initially started. And I was saying to myself, well, but that's certainly important, but it's so remote and so far away from most people. It doesn't touch most people's lives as closely as so many other issues that are so ominous and so foreboding, none greater than HIV/AIDS. And nobody was talking about AIDS in 1985. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. He didn't mention the word publicly till 1987, till 40,000 people had already died. And he didn't do it because of the stigma attached to people connected to the virus. So one would have been perceived to have been at risk, to have been out advocating on behalf of it, which meant that you were either an intravenous drug user, you were gay, or you were Haitian. So now I thought to myself, I'm a single male designer, so everybody will probably just assume I'm Haitian. But maybe because I wasn't fazed by it, and I saw it as this extraordinary opportunity to say something important when no one was, or few were, certainly. There were people. And you know, they say that you can scream in an auditorium, in a loud auditorium, and no one hears you, but you can whisper in a silent one, and you're heard. And it was as quiet as could be in those days. So somehow I decided, I reached out to Annie Leibovitz, who was a renowned photographer even then in our days, and we in turn reached out to all the iconic, well-known individuals and models, and we shot a campaign to speak about the fact that no one would speak about HIV/AIDS. And essentially we spoke about stigma. And we used beautiful women and children as the models in the campaign because few were intimidated and still are by beautiful women and children. We don't learn to dislike children until they grow up, especially if we have to pay for their college education. So that set me down a path. About 2 years later, in 1987, I was asked to join the board of ANFAR. ANFAR, you should know, by the way, was formally created in 1985, about the same time, by the coming together of Elizabeth Taylor and Dr. Mathilde Krim. They formed two organizations, one from LA and one from New York, and they formed this national research organization. So I joined the board, and thinking that it needed to be real, and all of a sudden I felt like it had changed me in certain ways. All of a sudden what I was doing felt meaningful and important. And I've had and been afforded this extraordinary opportunity to play a role, you know, just a role, and there's many other people who live it and do it every day and who've been extraordinary in truly impacting the effect of the virus on people's lives everywhere in the world. And 25 million people have already died. There's 35 million, there's estimates that came out recently that say those numbers are very low. A million people are still living with the virus, but the biggest statistic of all is still 0. That's the amount of people that have been cured. And so Dr. Krim stepped down as chairman about 6, 7 years ago under the condition that I would agree to assume that role, which I did reluctantly because I have a day job. But it's been very rewarding, and I hope I won't have to do it that much longer. So I began 20-plus years ago changing the company's agenda message to speak about, again, not just what's on people's bodies, what's on them, but also what's on their mind, not just what they stand in, but what they stand for. Not just what they look like on the outside, but who they are on the inside. And it's elevated our sense of purpose, and it's significantly enhanced our relationship with our customers. We're not just a company that does cause-related marketing, which is a term that was coined and often accredited to us in those days. I believe it's become part of our culture. It's what the brand stands for, it's what the corporation stands for, and it's what the designer himself stands for. As I think Neil said a few minutes ago, I believe that, and I have been asked, because we're a public company, do I feel it is the responsibility of corporate America, of any corporation, to engage with community? Are they, in fact, independent, or shouldn't they be independent from each other? My answer invariably has always been, not only do I believe they're not independent, I believe they're interdependent. And I think they are the proverbial hand that feeds each other. And I think all corporations will get there if they're not there now. I think either their hearts will get them there, or their balance sheets will get them there, and hopefully it'll be the former. But I do believe that it'll be the way business is done everywhere soon, which further enhances the viability and my extraordinary interest and regard for what Compass is doing. And then one asks, academia and community, should they be connected? And there is this inherent desire to operate independently and to have a and not allow the education process to be tainted and or influenced by community. But the reality is today that it is a unique and vital training ground for our communities. And these are our future leaders, these are our mentors, and that they are in fact interconnected and interdependent as well. There used to be a sense that one needed to build their own life to establish the credentials to then engage in the community. That one had to go to school, get good grades so that they could get into a good college, that in turn do well, make good connections, and then hopefully they'd get a good job, work really hard, give up everything in your life, make a lot of money, and then one day you could then engage in the community and you could give back. Today, the prevailing wisdom is that community building is maybe as, if not the most viable path to one's personal enhancement and career building. And I do believe that part of one's journey, if you can make engaging in community building part of the journey, which you couldn't really do before, that ultimately the rewards will be so much more significant, and not just spiritually, but also financially, and that they are not mutually independent as they may have once been. All information today, which is really intriguing to me, is available to everybody, anywhere, anytime. Knowledge is no longer proprietary. The newest insights and the greatest thinkers and the greatest minds are accessible and available to everyone, not just esteemed universities across the country. What we look to today are great processors, editors, curators of that information, inspiring presenters of that extraordinary knowledge, filters. Most schools today present the relevant content without a real understanding of context. And students are offered the newest tools without an instruction manual on how to apply them afterwards. So what should the role, I believe, of universities, of Compass for that matter, be, and of what, in fact, what Compass is? It's to encourage, inspire, and empower our next generation of thought leaders and community builders. It's extraordinary to me because young people, despite everything that they're living with, are still wonderfully naive and impressionable. And they believe that social justice is a birthright. And they so badly want to be guided with the tools, and they want somebody to tell them that, in fact, it is, and that all this, in fact, can come true, but that doesn't usually happen. I also believe that young people, we all understand the need for meaningful and sustainable social change. But change is very overwhelming. Everybody wants change. Nobody wants to be changed. And the older you get, the more that's the case. This morning, I'm proud to say that we will be joining forces with Compass partners to further the social entrepreneurship program movement worldwide. Together, we'll seek to identify, encourage, and empower the next generation of change agents. We hope to teach the skills necessary to navigate public, private, for-profit, not-for-profit universes. The process will encourage the taking down of walls and the building of new state-of-the-art proverbial bridges to help identify synergies and efficiencies, not usually terms used in academia. I often encourage students not to obsess over their initial career choices. First of all, their jobs will change, according to the internet, as many as 9 times in the first 16 years. But they won't. And there is a distinction between what one does and who one is. And regardless of the path you choose, you can be an effective agent of change, a difference maker, and a social entrepreneur. And I believe serving communities, I believe, is not just an obligation, but I believe it's a privilege. In conclusion, I'm going to share with you a favorite story of mine. It's about an old guy who's driving down a crowded highway, and he gets a call in the middle of the night from his wife, and she goes, "Honey, I just heard on the radio that there is a lunatic on the same road you're on driving in the wrong direction." And he paused, thought for a second, not wanting to unnecessarily alarm her. And finally he said, "Darling, it's worse than that. There are hundreds of them." So you should know that much of my journey I felt a little bit like that lunatic, and so might you. The lesson here is that even if you find yourself going against traffic, you may still be heading in the right direction. Thank you very much.